how did that come about? How did you and Dash come about?
It's kind of a ironic story because I was supposed to see my counselor one day, but she wasn't in, and they said, well, we want you to go see this other counselor. And this other counselor had a Great Dane service dog named Wicked. And so I went in to talk to her. Her name was Bethany. And I talked to Bethany, and we were talking, and I wasn't really opening up, but then her service dog came over to me, and I started to just pet the dog. And as I was petting it, I started to open up more and more and more. And before I knew it, and even she was surprised that I was talking. And so we ended up switching my counselors over to her through this program. And so every time I came in, I would sit there and talk with Wicked, and she even let me take the dog amongst the community. So they realized that, oh my God, Scott needs to get himself a service dog. This guy is a perfect candidate for a service dog. And that's when they hooked me up with the Service Dog Project in Ipswich, Massachusetts. And it was there that I started the process of getting my own service dog.
And in the book, you say that Dash chose you.
She did. I was there originally. They wanted me to meet this dog named Emmett. And Emmett was a male dog, which Dash is pretty tall. She's up to my waist. She's 160 pounds. Emmett's about 4 inches taller, probably 205 pounds.
Ooh.
A big dog. And so they wanted me to meet Emmett and possibly do the matching process. Normally it takes several months to get a dog with the Service Dog Project. The way they want you to do it is there to go and volunteer, get used to the dogs. They want to see how you're interacting with the dogs before they just, these are $26,000 dogs. So they don't just want to give you that dog if you're not going to take care of it. So you got to kind of prove your worth a little bit. So I went there, and Emmett and I were not seeing eye to eye. He would growl at me, and I'd step back, and then I'd take a step at him, and I'd growl at him, and it just wasn't working. So they finally said, well, okay, well, you're here, Scott, for the weekend anyway, so why don't you go over to this one kennel and talk to a dog named Dash? And I'm like, okay. And they said, well, Dash is deathly afraid of men, and we want her to get used to a man's voice. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. So we went over and talked. I was with a trainer named Tracy, and I went over to the kennel, and Dash was standing in the corner, and her chest was shaking, and she didn't know who I was, and she only knew me as a strange guy standing there looking at her. I opened up the kennel door, I put a biscuit at the door, and Tracy and I went back into the common area, and we were on the couch. And while we were on the couch, I was talking to Tracy. She says, oh my God, Scott, don't look. And of course, I'm going to look. So I looked, and here comes Dash. And she literally walked right up to me. And she got up on the couch right next to me. And she sat there all proud and ever, still had the biscuit in her mouth. And she put her head on my shoulder, and she dropped that biscuit in my lap. And that's what she chose me. It changed my life. It really did. I honestly give a lot of my credit to my dog, just in the fact that she's given me a voice. She's given me, with the mobility options that I had with my knee at the time. But I found out that more and more and more that she was really helping me with my PTSD. She was my comfort. She was my security blanket. And it helped me immensely.
She's made a big difference.
Oh my God, night and day. Where I was to where I am, it's night and day. And she's been a godsend, and I love her to death.
So how did the book come about?
Well, I was, first of all, I've always talked about doing my book. I always wanted to do the book. Every time I tell my story, everybody says, my God, you should write a book. So I was actually working with a friend one day here in Plattsburgh, and I was hanging sheetrock, helping him hang sheetrock. And all of a sudden, in comes this female. She comes walking in, and she was looking at me like, hey, where's the guys at? And I was saying, well, they're out front. So she went out, she does her thing, she comes back in, and then she goes, and she knew a little bit about me beforehand, so I had no idea. So as she was working with me, she asked me, she goes, so Scott, tell me your story. And then that's when she introduced herself to me. Her name is Janice Wheeler. And so I got telling her my story, and she said, you coming back tomorrow? I said, yeah. So she goes, I'll be back tomorrow. She didn't tell me who she was or what she did. Next day she came back, she handed me her book. And it's called The New Girls. And she wrote a biography on herself called The New Girls. And she goes, I want you to read my book, and if you like it, I would love to write your book. And so I read her book, and we agreed, and You know, next thing you know, before I knew it, I mean, the title of the book, Not Today, K-N-O-T, was a no-brainer for me because it's not about today. It's not today. I'm not going to do it today. And then, so we actually both co-wrote the book. I kind of tell my story in the book, whereas she narrates it. And it was a great effort. I mean, it took us several months, but it came out amazing.
She's your biographer.
Yeah, she's my biographer.
Collected everything and told the story.
Yeah.
And in the book, you get into trauma that you experienced as a boy that could have added to the difficulty you had when you were a young man in the Air Force. You were sexually abused by a family friend when you were 10.
Yes.
And that had a lasting impression on you. That was a secret you kept throughout your childhood.
I kept that right up until I was almost 30 years old. You know, being sexually abused as a child, you know, it's one of the things I talk about is the fact that with a predator like that, they have a way of making it feel like it's your fault. So as a very young child, I took it on it. It was me. It was my fault. And I was the one who had to keep the secret. So in a roundabout way, I was protecting him so that he wouldn't tell the secret. And I became a very good liar and a master manipulator at 10 years old. And this went on for 2 years. And finally, you know, again, these encounters were very violent. I mean, where I was physically harmed and, you know, mentally destroyed.
And you describe that in the book, and you say you wanted the reader to understand what you went through.
I feel it's very important for me in the book to be as raw as possible, because to say, you know, when people talk about, you know, sexual assaults or, you know, abuse or things like that, I just wanted to give them a very clear definition as to what I went through. And so I talk about that. I mean, like I said, he physically harmed me to the point where, you know, he did damage to me. And this went on for 2 years where it became an expected thing. And you just, you know, if it doesn't happen, then I'm worried. Where is he? You know, is he hiding someplace? And this went on for a total of 2 years, and I became, like I said, a very master manipulator, because I learned at a very young age how to bottle everything up. And I kept everything inside. So that taught me at a very young age to do all that, so that way when I got into the military, and I started going through these traumas and everything else, I already knew how to internalize. I already knew how to keep everything in. So I just let that happen, and, you know, the only way I could cope was through alcohol. And it set the path for me as an adult until the day where I tried to commit suicide.
And in the book you mentioned that gentleman still lives in the community.
Yes.
When you came back years later, you did go to police when you decided it was time to report this man.
Yes.
You went to police. The statute of limitations had run out,
Yes.
but he is on the radar of police in case there's any activity now or in the future.
Yes, correct. I bumped into him, you know, at a local business in Treadwell's Mills, and you know, when I saw him, he was with a young boy at the time, and it made me physically sick, you know. And I just remember going out to the car and my sisters, and, you know, we ended up going over to my parents' house, and that's the very first time I spoke about it. And you know, I had to break my father's heart because he was not a well man. He was dying of, you know, diabetes and renal failure and things like that. So I went through all that and had to literally break my family's heart as to what happened to me. And it was that day that I went to the New York State Police, and they told me the statute had already run out. But all they did was took my information. I told them who he was, where he lived. I told them about the young child I saw, and I even knew the young child's family. So they did a follow-up investigation. I don't really know what happened. All I know is as of right now, he is still on the radar, and he knows he's on the radar.
So you had to deal with this along with the PTSD. So combined, this was what you had been dealing with for so many years.
I was a powder keg. I was literally that proverbial powder keg. You know, and I talk about when I do my presentations, you know, you think about the scale of justice, or the New York State seal where they got the scales. You know, you keep on adding on so many times until finally your scale tips. And my scale tipped, and I just couldn't take any more. I'm surprised I took as much as I did, looking back, because any one of those traumas really could have tipped me. And then you even think about in 2005, I had lost my father, you know, who was my hero. You know, I lost him to cancer. I also lost my military career, and I went through another divorce. So all three of those were major, and then I was told to go out in the community and act normally. And there was no way, I was a mess. I was a complete mess.
You mention in the book that you will deal with PTSD for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that your life is better.
Yes.
But you admit that there are still challenges. Your relationship with your family, with your children, is one of those areas.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, when that year, especially right around September 11th, I talk about how I was a horrible father. I was, a horrible husband. I was a horrible brother. When I struggled, it was much easier for me to disassociate from my kids than it was to deal with it, because I was ashamed of myself. You can't have a healthy relationship with somebody if you're not healthy yourself. And I lost contact with all my kids. And to this day, it's still a work in progress. I hope one day we can come back around and rebuild that. But I know my kids were well taken care of, with their stepdads. I follow them all the time. I'm always, I'm there if they ever want to talk, and I'm open to that door to be open. But it's just one of those side effects that happened to me, where I admit my mistakes, I admit where I was, and I admit who I was. It doesn't give me an excuse for what I did, but there's a reasons why I was doing that. And again, it's mostly through shame and embarrassment.
Your book is on sale on Amazon.
Yes.
And you mentioned that some of the proceeds from the sale of the book will go to the Service Dog Project in Massachusetts, where you met Dash.
Yes.
To help them help other veterans and people with PTSD.
Yeah, the Service Dog Project, like I said, they're in Ipswich, Massachusetts. They only do Great Danes for mobility, balance, and PTSD. I committed to them that portions of the proceeds would go to the Service Dog Project, because literally they saved my life. They were an instrumental part of me getting my life back together by the gift of a $26,000 best friend. So I vowed to them to do that.